Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, who is a board-certified gastroenterologist, medical physician, author of the incredible bestseller Fiber Fueled and Fiber Fueled Cookbook, and is really dedicating his life to gut health and helping people understand what they can do to improve the gut based on lifestyle medicine, including plant-based eating and so on. So, Will, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Dr. Frank, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, when we start, it's nice to start with a little personal information. And I know a lot of times when people circle or travel into the plant exclusive or plant-based world, many times they're coming from either personal pathology, family pathology, things of that nature. And I noticed in an interview you did, that's not actually the case for you. And you kind of stumbled upon this later on in your medical education when you had been going through a time where just energetically, and there was just so many different things going on that weren't working related to kind of the poor nutrition that you felt you were participating in. And so can you give us a little background on that little bit of the journey? And everybody loves a vegan love story. And I know your wife was one of the people that turned you on to some of this consciousness of eating. So give us a little background on that story before we plunge into some other things.
Yeah, I mean, she sure did. And I count that blessing every day because it transformed my life on many different levels, including my own personal health, including my career, including the wonderful family that I have, the beautiful children that I have. I mean, it's everything that a man could ask for comes from that moment. And but I think the backstory, really, you got to go back to, I know that you can appreciate this, that while you're in your medical training, it's just consumptive. They take everything that you got, and and you have very little left that's for you. There's not much time, there's not much energy, and there's not much opportunity for joy. And in those moments, you're just trying to find something that makes you feel a little bit better. And so as I moved through my 20s, I was completely committed to my work as a medical doctor and my training. And this led me to a place where it consumed me to a point that the only thing that I had in my life that I really enjoyed was food, but not healthy food. I hadn't discovered that yet. I was raised in a family where, like, we ate hot dogs after school. That was normal. Like a good meal was like ordering a pizza or getting a sub sandwich. And so that's where I came from. And my sort of, that foundation was put to the test by this lifestyle during my medical training. And so when I was tired, I mean, I would reach for unhealthy food, and it tasted good. And I felt good for like literally the 10 seconds that I was actually eating it.
Right.
And then I paid the price. And I paid the price not just because it would take the wind out of my sails and make me exhausted, but I paid the price with my health. And as I transitioned into my early 30s, I could no longer recognize the man that I saw in the mirror. I remembered myself as being an athlete. I played 3 sports in high school. I was the captain of 2 of the teams. And yet when I looked in the mirror I like just had turned 30. I was still quite young, but I look in the mirror and I see, a person with a big gut that's hanging over their belt. And I was 50 pounds up relative to where I started. And so I needed something to change. I knew that I knew I was not in a good place. I knew that. And I was trying to figure out how to fix this. And the issue is that, despite my dream of being a medical doctor and the effort that I'd put into it and the training at great institutions like medical school at Georgetown, Northwestern for my residency, the University of North Carolina for my GI fellowship, despite all that, when it came time for me to need help, I didn't want my own medicine. And so I didn't really know what to do about that because I was a fully board certified internist. Like I could have treated myself.
Hmm.
And so I tried exercising my way out of it. And the bottom line is that this failed as hard as I tried. And I tried really hard. Exercise was not enough. And I really needed to change my diet, but I didn't have the ability to see with my own eyes that this was in fact the problem because this was the world that I grew up in, right? It was normal to eat hot dogs every day. And so anyway, one day I go on a date with this lovely person. I was very excited to be on a date with her. And we're at this restaurant called Acme in Carborough, North Carolina, which is right next to Chapel Hill. And I got the usual, which was a pork chop. And she ordered something that wasn't even on the menu. She said to the server, "Could you just bring me these 4 dishes? They're all plants. They're all plant-based, and they're sides. Bring me all 4. Just put them on a plate and make it look okay." And so that was her entree. And she cleaned her plate. She talked about how wonderful it was, how it felt, how delicious it was. And as I sat there, I looked at her and I thought, she looks amazing. She looks healthy. This seems effortless for her. And yet here I am, and I'm trying so hard and I'm failing. And it really made me ask the question, what if the food that you were raised on and that you enjoy is in fact the problem? And so I started with a rather simple, this was not a plunge into the pool. This was not a radical change overnight. I started with a simple choice. One day, instead of getting fast food for dinner, because in North Carolina at Hardee's, you can get 2,500 calories for $5.
Oh, I know. It's amazing. It's just remarkable.
Highly efficient in terms of the number of calories. And yet, of course, you pay the price in the long run. And so one day, rather than stopping at my usual place for my usual food, I went home and I made a smoothie. And it was just a giant, it was probably close to 40 ounces. And I sat there and I drank that and I felt amazing and I felt energized. And, after feeling so miserable for so long, the difference was profound, and it was profound enough for me to have a wake up call where, like, because I feel so well, I just want to feel well. And let me do that again, because that worked for me the first time. Let me try that again. And then you come back and you start doing this, and you start.
So that step there that you were doing, that was before you made any real attempt to evaluate the evidence base. Basically, that was just really experiential at that point. You were just trying because of the influence of this lovely woman in your life. You said, "Let me try this," and you started to see some benefit even before you really plunged into any literature or anything of that nature. Is that the way it went?
Yeah, this was not a part of my medical training. Nutrition was not a part of my medical training, and I think as the result of that, the other doctors that you train with, they're not trained in this either. They don't know anything about it, and so I didn't know anything, and so this was, to me, the experience that I needed, because as a medical doctor, if it could transform my life, which it did. I lost 50 pounds. I threw the blood pressure pills in the trash. My cholesterol came down. My anxiety and low mood, that lifted, and my self-esteem surged. All those things happened for me. And so as a medical doctor, when you discover something like this, you ask questions. Why was I not taught this? But the other thing that happens is you say, if it can do it for me, there is just I don't care. Like at this point, you can't prove it any more than when it happens to yourself.
Yeah, it's the best empirical evidence there is. Let's be realistic.
Yeah.
And I even tell people that, when you're teaching, I say, look, I can teach you this person can teach you that. But the truth is, if you go home and do it and don't experience these results, you're not going to adopt it anyway. So it's going to come down to that empirical evidence to some degree. I mean, at some point.
I love that, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's important for us to always remember that at the end of the day, this is a results-driven business, and people want to feel better. They want to feel better, and we have to help them get there. And it's not one size fits all. But that being said, there are clearly rules of biology that would support us moving towards a plant-based diet, and that's ultimately, this is what you're getting at. Is ultimately that's what I discovered. Is first the results came. And then I started to ask questions, and then I needed to answer those questions, and I turned to the literature.
And that's when you got into that expansive literature. I have to tell you, one of the things that always shocked me is that we understand that a lot of medical care is disease management. There's not the mentality that major problems can not only be prevented, but can be reversed. The idea of that is so foreign to medical education. It's changing, and we know that it's changing, and that's a beneficial thing. And there's a lot of people trying to make that change. But I was always amazed that when you take a specialty like gastroenterology, and I go back to the time in my childhood when I dealt with some very profound irritable bowel, even some colitis-like symptoms that went on for the longest time, and going to the best experts in a place like New York City, I was always shocked to feel and find out that these big GE docs, where you would think that there would be some sense that because we're dealing with the gut and the bowel, what you're eating would have some major impact on that system. And yet it was such a foreign concept that it would even have any relationship to that. And I'm just so happy that, that people like you and people that that are like you in terms of that field that you're in are starting to at least embrace that. But it's such a slow change because the system is so kind of stacked against you in terms of, you take this kind of medical approach and you take this kind of pharmaceutical approach, and yeah, that's okay. You can go eat that, and just don't worry. Just as long as you take this, we'll manage that problem. And so, it was funny for me because in my teenage years, I met a man who was an insurance salesman in the Bronx, but he had collected an anti-medical library for about 30 years. And when I started reading through his library, I encountered all the principles that are part of the NHA. And when I instituted that, colitis and irritable bowel and all those things became a thing of the past. And I was always shocked in my mind to say, it's funny. After all these years of medical mismanagement, it took an insurance salesman from the Bronx to solve my colitis. Yep. And that's exactly what happened. And so I could imagine that as that was going on, you encountered a certain amount of frustration, I guess, even on a professional level, to realize that your peers, the educational component of what you were doing, had no real place for that in the day-to-day workings as you started to try to institute those changes in your own patients.
Well, as you know, these issues are rather complex, and a big part of this is the system. There's the educational system that doesn't support this and doesn't provide not just doctors, but healthcare providers on multiple different levels are not being provided the education that they need to embrace and acknowledge the power of nutrition. And simultaneously, and I think there's historical reasons for this. Going back to how we created a healthcare system after World War II, now that we have penicillin, and we were seduced by the power of the pill to the point that we built our whole system around it. And in the process of doing this, we completely lost track of the goal of the system in the first place. The goal of the system is to prevent disease. The goal should not be to wait until you have disease and then patch it up. And yeah, I completely agree with you. It seems so obvious. It seems so obvious.
You lose the forest for the trees, like you made the point there, and it's a big point. The goal became the endless search for magic bullets, losing sight of the biological requirements to promote health and the outcome of health. And, with the advent, again, of like lifestyle medicine in the 80s, at least those pillars of biological requirement are now being, highlighted and emphasized by a huge population of physicians. And thank God that that's actually happening, because it will finally instill this what I'll call this profound level of simplicity, cutting through the deception that's been so much a part of the way people have been treated and cared for.
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you, and I'm glad that there's organizations, for example, the NHA. I'm glad that there's the American College of Lifestyle Medicine out there helping to facilitate this, because
Right.
there is a desire, particularly among younger doctors
Right.
who see this, and they just aren't willing to accept this. But the problem with where we're at literally right now in 2023 is that you have to be so stubborn to insert this into your practice and stick with it, because the problem is that right now it costs doctors money to do this. They
Right.
lose money in the process of doing this, and it creates a lot of headaches. And so, I'm very grateful for the people who really do care about this. But at the end of the day, we do need systematic change in order for this to be fully accomplished. We do need to find a way to reward doctors and other healthcare providers for providing preventative care that keeps people out of the hospital and keeps them in a position where those pills are not actually necessary.
Right.
And then I don't want to go so far as to sound conspiratorial. I don't want to go that far, but I do think that it is true, though, that the pharmaceutical industry, it's big, it's powerful, and they have absolutely no reason to use that money and that power to actually focus on your health, which would involve talking to you about diet and lifestyle.
Yeah, even if it's not conspiratorial, we could definitely call it vested interest, and so it is that. And then when you're dealing with those monopolistic corporate entities, it's very difficult to see the individual component through that. And that's why I always said, when you look at a lot of docs individually, they're trying to help people. I mean, we know that it's not a conspiracy, but
Yeah.
they're dealing within a system that is so vested in the amount of money and economics that are involved in pushing pills and pushing certain kinds of treatment with quotas and so on, that it's hard to overcome that, as you brought up. We're going to take a short break, Will, and we'll come right back. I'm here with Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, and we're going to come back after a short word from our sponsor, the National Health Association. You're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Are you ready to revolutionize your health? Then you're ready for the 2024 National Health Association Conference taking place in June of 2024. Join us for inspiring talks by experts like Drs. Dean and Aisha Shirzai, Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Ron Weiss, and Dr. Lori Marbus, in addition to Drs. Goldhammer, Dr. Esser, Dr. Fitzgerald, and yours truly, Dr. Frank Sabatino, along with leading SOS-free chefs Kathy Fisher, Brittany Giroudi, and Dylan Holmes. Register now at healthscience.org/NHA conference and enjoy early bird savings until December 31st of 2023. This conference will transform your health journey. Secure your spot today. And remember, your feedback matters. Please take a moment to leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. Also, be sure to visit the NHA website at healthscience.org. That's healthscience.org to get lots of great recipes, articles, newsletter archives, and become a member of the NHA. I'm Dr. Frank Sabatino, your host, and now back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, and you got to give me credit for getting that name correct. You got to give me a lot of credit for that.
I'm actually quite impressed. And I think the key here, to be completely honest with you, is whether you're right or whether you're wrong, you just need to say it with great bravado.
You got to say it with gusto. That's the way it is. So let's go a step further, because let's get into let's geek out just a little bit, because we want to get into this idea. And I know the idea is we're really talking about gut health. And when we talk about gut health, it's a really intriguing area, because the health of the gut involves so many correlations with the health of the immune system and the health of the nervous system and the health of the endocrine system. And I think sometimes people don't really have the big picture sense of how coordinated and connected all of that is. And part of the connection works through that teeming world within that we call the microbiota. So, and you have mentioned it, and many people have mentioned it. We know that those organisms that live within us play a major role in the production of, postbiotic entities, and needing the fiber of whole foods to support the kinds of work that they do. So let's get into that idea of pre, pro, and postbiotic integrity and how that starts to play a role in affecting these incredible systems that we're talking about. And
Well,
I know the key to that is the exact book that you wrote, The Power of Fiber, in the translation of all of that. So let's address that if we can a little bit.
yeah, and if we, just to contextualize this as we go in, I mean, I would imagine many of the listeners to the show are consumers of fiber, but the average American is not. 95% of America is not consuming even close to the recommended amount of fiber. And so, within that framework, here we are, and we've discovered really in the last 20 years, due to new technology, we've discovered that there's this, I mean, frankly, an organ, and it's invisible, but it's inside of you, mostly focused in your colon, which is the large intestine, where there are 38 trillion microbes. By microbes, I mean microscopic organisms that are mostly bacteria, but also it can be things like fungi.
Right.
And they're there with a purpose. So because we evolved with them from the very beginning, and we're not the only things, like the only animals that have a microbiome. All animals have a microbiome. So do all plants. Any life on this planet, anything that's alive, either has a microbiome or it's a part of the microbiome.
Right.
And so they've been there since the beginning of the planet, and they're the earliest life. And basically, they established the framework of how our biology functions. And we have trusted them with really important physiology. We need them to do certain things for us to be the best versions of ourselves. And if they don't do those things, then it's not possible for us to be the best versions of ourselves. We need them. We can't get by without them. And that, that involves a number of different things: digestion, our metabolism, which is like our engine,
Right.
our immune system, our hormones. You mentioned the endocrine system, our mood, our cognition, how our brain works. Even the expression of our genetic code has been shown to be manipulated by these microbes. And the way that they do this, the way that they actually work on a physiologic basis, is that they have the capacity to transform anything that we put into our mouth. And in the majority of cases, like particularly when you're eating a healthful diet, a plant-based diet, what they're actually doing is they're helping you to get nutrition from your food that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get access to. Fiber, we've kind of heard this myth of fiber that it goes in the mouth and it comes out the other end.
Right.
There is some truth to that. The roughage, that is what the roughage does. But there's this other type of fiber that's called soluble fiber that actually is food for these microbes. And that's what we call a prebiotic. Prebiotic basically means food for the microbes that results in benefits for humans. And so because we consume this fiber, it gets down to the colon where they live. They get to eat. And and much like you and I, Frank, like I'm not the nicest guy if I don't have a good meal, right? I
Right.
get a bit hangry. And these microbes are much like that. So when we feed them, they are strong, they are empowered, and then they reward us by taking that fiber and releasing it. And what they release are called short chain fatty acids. The classic one is butyrate. And these short chain fatty acids are, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, in all of my years of study in medicine, I started medical school in 2002. So in over 20 years of studying medicine, these are the most anti-inflammatory molecules that I've ever come across. And when we talk about this full whole body approach of digestion, metabolism, immunity, hormones, mood, brain health, and the expression of our genetic code, when we talk about all these things, the main way in which the microbes are actually manipulating in a beneficial way to us as humans is through the production of these short chain fatty acids. But the key is that they can't do that if we don't actually give them the ingredients they need in order
Right.
to prepare it. That's the fiber. And so here we are. And again, 95% of Americans are not just deficient, they're wildly deficient. And and I would go so far as to say that, like, in today's modern world, and I don't blame people for this, I blame the access to good, high quality information for this. The average person is very, very worried about their protein intake, and they're most likely over consuming protein in the
Right.
United States, and they show no concerns about their fiber intake. Yet the benefits to fiber, I mean, I'm happy to jump into them. There's just so many. And this is how this is how we could be preventing disease and living longer, healthier lives.
Yeah, I mean that story to me, because I've been fascinated by short chain fatty acids for a very long time. Because when you look at something like those organisms taking um, fiber, fermenting it, and let's take something like butyrate, just for example, one of the primary ones. And I want to talk about propionate too, because there is some interesting data on propionate affecting reward centers in the brain, dealing with satiety signals.
Yep.
And I want to touch base on that too. But the idea, and I don't think people realize how much the large bowel, the colon, is really, the cells are really fastened by these tight junction proteins that create a very tight barrier, because the large bowel is not supposed to be absorbing large molecules. It's supposed to be absorbing basically water and small electrolytes and things that are coming down that fecal mass. So when I looked at butyrate, and you can tell me where I'm wrong and where I'm right, it looked like that butyrate itself has an impact on promoting the genetic production of those tight junction proteins, and actually playing a major role in stabilizing that fastening of that barrier, in addition to producing the mucus lining that is the protective overlaying line, overlayer of that. That's also the first line of the innate immune system. So when you just think about something like that on a simple level, I mean, the level of interesting organization and complexity is really kind of mind blowing to me. So that when you made the point that, and we'll make this point again, that the diversity of diet, the diversity of plants gives us the greatest variety of options for supporting the greatest diversity of those organisms. Because many people talk about the fact that there's not one absolute healthy profile of organisms, but the diversity of them, which is fostered by plant consumption,
Yep.
is really what gives you the greatest benefit. And I know you came up with your own, people love acronyms, and I loved your F goals acronym. So why don't you share that? Because that addresses that idea of diversity. And people have, I think, a good, clear understanding of it from that.
First of all, I just want to compliment you to tell you that if you're not watching the video right now, for the listeners at home, I can't help but smile, because you are so well informed on what you were just talking about in terms of the gut barrier and the importance of the gut barrier in terms of protecting our body, including our immune system. That is 100% accurate, the way that you just described that. And butyrate, it does do that. The gut barrier is actually a dynamic thing that needs to be supported. It's not just a wall that gets built once,
Right.
and you leave it alone. It needs to be perpetually reconstructed and managed. And butyrate is what does that. In addition to butyrate actually propping up the probiotics, the good guy bacteria, you don't need to take them in a capsule. You just need to feed your microbes. And when you get the butyrate, it'll actually support the good guys and it'll suppress the bad guys. And the last thing that butyrate does right there on that local level is it actually protects us from colon cancer.
Right.
And this is the reason why there's such overwhelming data about how fiber is protective from colon cancer, in addition to a number of other cancers. So with regard to this concept, I mean, if there's one takeaway for the listeners at home, no matter who you are, you could eat a fantastically healthful plant-based diet, and I am very happy and excited that you do, because that's the diet that I recommend. But we all need to strive to focus on diversity in our diet, getting as many varieties as possible. And part of this is, as you mentioned, Frank, that when we have a diverse diet has been clearly associated with a diverse microbiome, and that is a resilient, strong microbiome. That's the microbiome that we want. But it's also just nutrition. I mean, good old nutrition is like when you eat a lot of different things, you basically are balancing out your diet so that you're getting all the nutrients that you need, because every single one of those foods has specific nutrients that are beneficial to your body. But, if we only eat kale, we really wouldn't be that healthy, to be honest with you. We need the diversity.
Right.
So I came up with this acronym to remember the foods, just to kind of keep in mind. Clearly, there's more than just this in terms of what you
Mhm.
go after. But these are the foods that I'm trying to emphasize in my personal life and trying to get them into my diet on at least a daily basis, if not every single meal. So F goals. I like this acronym because F for fiber, like fiber
Right.
goals. So F stands for fruit and fermented. Fruit is actually wonderfully great for us. I don't understand why it's vilified out there. It's bizarre. And fermented foods, there's emerging data, actually quite interesting data, that I'm happy to talk about in more detail, showing us that actually you can enhance your gut microbiome with fermented foods and also reduce inflammation. Get your immune system turned down a little bit with fermented foods. So I strongly recommend them. G stands for greens and whole grains. So greens are, of course, the most nutrient-dense foods that exist. It's a gift from nature, how much nutritional density there is in there for the greens. And whole grains, they have fiber, they have resistant starches, they have polyphenols. I would go so far as to say that whole grains are a gut health superfood, and I would pair them with the next letter, which is, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's a little further down. L is for legumes.
Right.
And so grains and legumes, they're, to me, like, these are different categories, but the benefits are quite similar. And that is that these are gut health superfoods. So, okay. O stands for omega-3 superseeds. Now, omega-3s are healthy fats. And the ideal source of these fats is not just to get the fat. The ideal source is actually to get the fat in combination with fiber, which is actually entirely possible to do when you're consuming flax and chia seeds and hemp seeds, and to a slightly lesser degree, but still very good, walnuts. A stands for aromatics. So aromatics are like the onions and garlic and leeks and shallots. They're so delicious, and they're really good for you. So I mentioned L is for legumes. Again, I consider that to be a gut health superfood. Like if I could make a compelling argument for just one, that's probably where I would go.
Mhm.
And then S, I got to the end of the line and I still had a lot that I wanted to say. So I packed 3 into the letter S. So, and they are shrooms. So shrooms like mushrooms, and sprouts. So like specifically sulforaphane. Gosh, Frank, I'm blanking on my last S. I think there's a third one.
Sea greens, sea vegetables.
Sea vegetables, yes, exactly. So, and sea vegetables, and part of the advocacy there is not necessarily that you need to be eating sea vegetables on a daily basis or with every meal, but it's more so to say that the majority of us are not eating any of them, and they can be a helpful part of your diet.
Well, I love the acronym. I think it's great. People love acronyms, and I love the way you kind of got shrooms in there. That was very cool too. So, what was interesting to me when I was looking at some data, this concept of biological mutualism is kind of an interesting thing to me. How organisms or things interact to benefit each other. The gut microbiota takes a kind of an incredible, unique place in that dance. So, for example, I know you highlight cruciferous veggies because of isothiocyanates like sulforaphane and all of that. It was intriguing to me that when we eat plants, the compounds in the plants called glucosinolates are converted into sulforaphane, but they need an enzyme called myrosinase.
Yep.
It's really interesting to me that the gut microbiota produces that enzyme. It's actually a byproduct of the gut microbiota. So by giving those organisms the fiber that they need, they produce the enzyme that allows us to translate the nutrient in the plant food to the most beneficial form for us. That's just such a mind-blowing dance when you really think about that kind of connectedness. Or if you take like tannins in seeds and berries and so on, the gut microbiota converts those into compounds that will literally alter epigenetically the gene code to reduce colon cancer. They actually change the genetic expression. They methylate DNA. They acetylate histone proteins in the chromatin material. So that mutualism, I try to get people to really see that dance because we tend to look at all things very disconnected and separate. And when you're looking at gut health and these kinds of things, that issue of how things benefit mutually with the kinds of foods you're talking about is just a remarkable miracle to me. I mean, it's just.
I agree. It is a miracle, and it's amazing how we have this microbiome that really truly is there with the intent of supporting us and making us better. And and it also is reflective of our environment.
Right.
And so, and you're sort of getting at that you can like cultivate certain enzymes within the microbes based upon the dietary choices that you make. And and the truth is that the opposite can also be true, by the way. If you think about the way that the average American eats, there was research that was done by Professor Christopher Gardner, who's a friend of mine who's out at Stanford. And basically, the study was looking at the Beyond Burgers, right? Like the plant-based meat alternatives, and comparing that to eating a regular burger. Now, I'm not here to advocate for plant-based meats, but I do think what's interesting is that in this study, they looked at the order of like with which they gave first because it was a crossover. So, some people got the plant-based burger first, followed by the meat burger, and some people got the meat burger first, followed by the plant-based burger. And what they discovered is that those people who got the plant-based burger first, because they were eating a plant-based diet, they had a microbiome that was not capable of producing something called TMAO that has been associated with coronary artery disease when they ate the meat burger. But on the flip side, those who ate the meat burger first, they actually primed their microbiome to produce this TMAO. And so, essentially it demonstrates really with clarity this concept that the food choices that you make are ultimately reflected in your gut microbiome, and those can be to our benefit, such as when we get short chain fatty acids, but they can also be to our detriment. And and here we are, and the average American in the United States is consuming more than their body weight in meat on a yearly basis, yet again deficient in fiber.
So, Will, as we wind down this incredible discussion we've been having, do you have any final words or thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, thanks, Dr. Frank. Thank you, Dr. Frank. This was amazing. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful to the NHA, to Mark and Wanda Huberman for their advocacy, and I enjoy also spending time with them. I got to see Mark a while back down in Bluffton, South Carolina, which is very close to where I live. So anyway, and for those of you who are interested in learning more about my work, you can check out my books, Fiber Fueled and the Fiber Fueled Cookbook. And if there's one place to start, I would go to my website, which is theplantfedgut.com. So theplantfedgut.com. And when you go there, what you'll find is there's connections to my social media, to my courses. I have an online newsletter, and it's a great place to start because I'm quite proud of the newsletters that I get to send out to people, where I'll take new studies that are coming out and I get to really break them down and give you the details of like what's going on. So anyway, that can be a great place to start. Sign up for my email newsletter. If you're interested, check out my books. You can borrow them from your library if you prefer. And once again, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
That was such an amazing interview that we had today with Dr. Bulsiewicz, and I really want to urge our audience to really follow Will if you can at the URL that's in our show notes. You'll see that across the screen. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time to really share this incredible information with us. And I also want to thank all the people that are out there, because without you, we can't do what we do. And I want to really thank you for being part of this really healthy, active community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.